At every high-profile gala, a billionaire CEO paraded his wife in bizarre looks designed to make her the laughingstock of the room, while he basked in admiration. To the world, she seemed broken, silent, and completely under his control. But what no one noticed was that she was watching, learning, and planning. And the night she finally showed up as her true self, she didn't just reclaim her beauty. She destroyed his empire in front of everyone. Hello, fam. Welcome to True Love Stories, where we share interesting and intriguing stories. Please do well to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Do not forget to like and share with your loved ones. Now let's dive into the story. Los Angeles had a way of turning ambition into spectacle, and no one embodied that better than Damon Cross. By 38, he had everything the city admired: tech wealth, media influence, and the kind of presence that made people straighten their posture when he entered a room. His name carried weight in Silicon Beach and Beverly Hills alike. He funded startups, hosted exclusive events, and appeared on magazine covers with headlines that called him visionary, disruptor, the future. And beside him, at least in photographs, stood his wife, Anita Cross. But long before she became a carefully controlled accessory to Damon's image, Anita was a force all her own. Back at UCLA, Anita Johnson was known for more than her beauty, though that alone turned heads effortlessly. She was the student professors referenced mid-lecture, the one whose arguments dismantled entire discussions and rebuilt them sharper. Her voice carried confidence, not arrogance, clarity, not noise. She wore her natural hair in full, textured styles, twists, curls, sometimes a bold afro that framed her face like a halo. Her fashion was expressive but intentional, blending modern black elegance with her own creative edge. Anita didn't follow trends, she shaped them. And she knew exactly where she was going. Law school, corporate litigation, maybe politics later. She had options, and the discipline to reach any of them. That's what drew Damon in. He first saw her at a campus networking event, surrounded by people, but clearly not seeking attention. She was mid-conversation, calmly dismantling a senior executive's flawed argument about market ethics. Damon didn't interrupt, he watched. Later, he introduced himself. "I don't meet many people who speak like they already own the room," he said. Anita didn't smile immediately. "I don't speak like that," she replied. "I just don't ask for permission." That answer stayed with him. At first, their relationship felt like a meeting of equals. Damon admired her intellect, her independence, the way she challenged him without hesitation. He'd ask her opinion on business strategies, debate ideas with her late into the night. He called her formidable, like it was a compliment he couldn't quite define. And Anita believed him. When he proposed sunset over the Pacific, a private terrace, soft music in the background, it felt like the natural next step. Two powerful people building something even bigger together. Their wedding was everything Los Angeles expected. Curated, expensive, flawless. Black excellence on full display. Tailored suits, custom gowns. A guest list that blended old money, new money, and rising influence. Anita stood radiant, her hair styled in an intricate crown of braids, her smile genuine, her future wide open. But marriages don't break in a single moment. They shift. Subtly at first. After the wedding, Damon began making small suggestions, things that sounded harmless on the surface. "You don't need to argue every point anymore," he told her one evening after a dinner with investors. "Sometimes it's better to let me lead those conversations." It wasn't a command. Not yet. Just a suggestion. Anita adjusted slightly. She told herself it was partnership, compromise, growth. Then came the comments about her appearance. "That hairstyle is bold," Damon said one morning, glancing at her reflection. "But we're moving in different circles now. Image matters." Another suggestion. Another small shift. The changes accumulated quietly. Her wardrobe became more curated, not by her, but by stylists Damon hired. Her schedule adjusted to fit his. Her opinions, once freely expressed, became filtered through his reactions. And then came the first gala. It was one of Damon's biggest events: investors, media, celebrities. The kind of night where appearances were everything. Anita stood in their bedroom, dressed in a sleek designer gown, her hair styled in a soft, natural look that complemented her features perfectly. She looked like herself, elevated but authentic. Damon walked in, paused, and tilted his head. "No," he said. She frowned slightly. "No, it's not right," he continued, stepping closer. "Too expected." She waited, confused. "I want to try something different," he said, his tone light but firm. "Something that makes a statement." "What kind of statement?" she asked. Damon smiled, but there was something in it she hadn't seen before. Something controlled. Measured. "Trust me." That phrase carried weight. It always had. But this time it landed differently. Later that evening, Anita sat in a high-end salon Damon had arranged, staring at her reflection as clippers buzzed softly near her ear. "Are you sure about this?" the stylist asked gently, hesitating. Anita met her own eyes in the mirror. She wanted to say no. She wanted to stand up, walk out, and reclaim the version of herself that felt steady and whole. But Damon's voice echoed in her mind. "Image matters, trust me. This is bigger than you." "It's fine," she said quietly. Strands of her identity fell away piece by piece. When it was done, she barely recognized the woman staring back at her. Her scalp was bare, her features suddenly more exposed, more vulnerable. It wasn't the lack of hair that unsettled her. It was the absence of choice. Back home, Damon circled her slowly, assessing. "Good," he said. "Now we're doing something interesting." But he wasn't finished. The makeup artist arrived next. What followed wasn't enhancement, it was distortion. Heavy, uneven contouring. Colors that clashed with her skin tone. Harsh lines that exaggerated rather than softened. "Is this necessary?" Anita asked, her voice tight. Damon adjusted her chin slightly, inspecting the work. "It's art," he said. "People remember art." When she finally stood fully dressed, gown flawless, posture perfect, face and head transformed, she felt like she was wearing someone else's identity. Or worse, like hers had been taken. At the gala, the reaction was immediate. Not admiration. Confusion. Whispers. Double takes. Damon thrived in it. He guided her through the room like a curated exhibit, introducing her with a subtle edge in his tone. "My wife, Anita. We like to challenge expectations." People nodded, unsure how to respond. Some smiled politely. Others avoided eye contact. No one asked Anita what she thought. As the night unfolded, Damon moved further away from her, drawn into conversations, laughter, attention. She stood alone more often than not, hyper-aware of every glance, every hushed comment. At one point, she caught her reflection in a mirrored wall across the ballroom. She froze. The woman staring back at her looked diminished. Not because she lacked beauty, but because it had been intentionally obscured, reshaped into something unrecognizable. And standing there, surrounded by luxury and noise, Anita felt something unfamiliar settle deep inside her. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. A question. How did I get here? Across the room, Damon laughed, completely at ease. And for the first time, Anita began to understand something she hadn't allowed herself to see before. This wasn't about art. This wasn't about image. This was about control. And she had just taken the first step into a life where she was no longer being seen, only shaped. The second gala was worse than the first. Not because Anita didn't expect it, but because she did. There was no confusion this time, no internal debate about whether Damon's choices were experimental or strategic. By the time the next invitation arrived, thick, embossed, exclusive, she already knew what it meant. Another performance. Another version of herself she wouldn't recognize. "Be ready by 6, Damon said casually that afternoon, scrolling through his phone as if the night ahead required no emotional cost. "We're expected early." Expected. The word lingered with her long after he left the room. Preparation had become a ritual of erasure. The stylists arrived like clockwork, efficient, polite, detached. They didn't ask Anita what she wanted anymore. They asked Damon. "What are we going for tonight?" One of them said, laying out palettes of makeup that felt more theatrical than elegant. Damon glanced up briefly. Edgy. Unsettling. I don't want her to blend in. Anita sat still, her hands resting in her lap, fingers lightly intertwined to stop herself from fidgeting. Unsettling. That was the point. This time, they painted her in sharp contrasts. Dark shadows dragged too far beneath her eyes, a pale foundation that muted the warmth of her skin, lips outlined in a shade that didn't belong to her. The result wasn't ugly in a careless way. It was deliberate, crafted, disorienting. When they finished, Anita stood slowly and faced the mirror. She tilted her head slightly. There was precision in what they'd done. Intention. And somehow that made it worse. Because it meant Damon wasn't misunderstanding beauty. He was redefining it, at her expense. The venue that night was a rooftop in downtown LA, overlooking a sea of city lights that stretched endlessly into the dark. Music floated through the air, smooth and expensive, blending with the low hum of influential conversations. As soon as they stepped out of the car, cameras flashed. Damon adjusted his jacket, instantly stepping into his public persona, relaxed, confident, untouchable. Anita followed. The shift was immediate. Photographers hesitated, not because they didn't recognize Damon, but because they didn't know how to frame her. A few took photos anyway, curiosity overriding uncertainty. By the time they entered the main space, the whispers had already started. Is that intentional? She's beautiful, but why would he? I heard it's some kind of statement. Anita kept her posture steady, her expression neutral. She had learned quickly. Reacting only fed the narrative. Damon, on the other hand, thrived in it. He leaned in close as they walked. Hear that? He murmured, just low enough for only her to catch it. They're talking. Anita didn't respond. That's relevance, he continued. Most people beg for that kind of attention. She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze for a brief second. And this is how you chose to get it? She asked quietly. Damon smiled, not warmly, but with a hint of amusement. It works, doesn't it? Before she could answer, he was already pulling away. The night followed a familiar pattern. Damon moved through the crowd effortlessly, shaking hands, exchanging names, collecting admiration like currency. He introduced her when necessary, but never lingered. My wife, Anita, he'd say, resting a hand at the small of her back. She's unforgettable. There was always a pause before the last word, just long enough to make it land differently. Then he'd drift away again. Anita remained. She stood near the edges of conversations, occasionally included but rarely engaged. People didn't know how to approach her, whether to compliment her, question her, or ignore what they were clearly noticing. Some tried. A woman in a gold dress smiled cautiously. You're very bold. Thank you, Anita replied, her tone calm. The woman hesitated. I just mean, it takes confidence. Anita held her gaze. It takes something, she said. The woman didn't ask what. Across the room, Damon laughed. Not a polite chuckle, a full, unrestrained laugh that carried above the music. Anita's eyes shifted instinctively toward the sound. He was standing close, too close, to a woman in a silver gown. One hand rested lightly on her arm, his posture angled inward, attention fully engaged. The woman leaned in as he spoke, smiling in a way that suggested familiarity, even if they had just met. Anita watched. Not because she wanted to, but because she couldn't not. This, too, had become part of the ritual. Damon didn't hide it. He performed it. Every glance, every touch, every laugh was deliberate. Not reckless, controlled. Measured just enough to be excusable, but obvious enough to be felt. And he always made sure Anita could see. At one point, his eyes flickered toward her across the room. Just for a second. Long enough to confirm she was watching. Then he turned back to the woman, smiling even wider. Time stretched in strange ways at these events. Minutes felt heavy, like they carried weight. Conversations blurred together. Faces became indistinct. Anita eventually moved toward a mirrored pillar near the edge of the venue, needing something solid, something grounding. She wasn't prepared for what she saw. The reflection didn't feel like a distortion anymore. It felt distant. Her posture was still poised. Her dress still elegant. But the essence of her, the energy, the presence, the certainty, felt muted. Like someone had turned the volume down on who she was. She leaned in slightly, studying her own face. And for a brief, unsettling moment, she struggled to remember exactly what she used to look like. Not physically, but internally. What did it feel like to walk into a room without calculating how you'd be perceived? Without bracing for judgment that wasn't yours to carry? What did it feel like to simply exist, without being managed? Her chest tightened. That quiet question from the first gala returned. But this time, it didn't come alone. How long has this been happening? When did I stop resisting? When did I start accepting this as normal? Behind her, the music swelled. Laughter echoed. Glasses clinked. Life continued. But inside Anita, something was shifting again. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. Because beneath the layers Damon had constructed, beneath the image, the control, the humiliation, there was still something he hadn't been able to erase. Awareness. And awareness, once fully awakened, doesn't stay quiet for long. Later that night, as they drove home through the glowing streets of Los Angeles, Damon seemed pleased. "You handled yourself well," he said, glancing at her briefly. "You're learning." Anita turned her head toward the window, watching the city blur past. Learning. He thought she was becoming what he wanted. He didn't realize she was becoming something else entirely. She didn't respond. And for the first time, her silence wasn't submission. It was observation. By the time the third gala approached, Anita no longer asked questions. She didn't protest the stylists. She didn't challenge Damon's choices. She didn't even look surprised when he described the night's concept with the same detached precision he used in business meetings. Minimalist distortion, he called it this time. Anita simply nodded. But something had changed. Her silence was no longer confusion, it was calculation. The preparation unfolded like a familiar script. Her scalp, already bare, was polished to a sheen under soft lighting. The makeup this time was colder, muted grays and sharp angles that hollowed her features, making her look almost sculptural, like a figure carved rather than alive. When she looked in the mirror, she didn't flinch. That, more than anything, unsettled her. Because the shock was gone, and in its place was distance. "Perfect," Damon said, adjusting the collar of his suit as he glanced at her reflection. "You're finally understanding the assignment." Anita met his eyes in the mirror. For a split second, something unreadable passed through her expression. "Yes," she said evenly. "I am." Damon smiled, satisfied. He didn't ask what she meant. The gala was held at a historic hotel in Pasadena, grand, polished, dripping with old money elegance. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen constellations above a sea of tailored suits and designer gowns. A live jazz band played softly in the background, their music blending into the hum of curated conversations. This crowd was different, more traditional, more observant, which made Anita's appearance stand out even more. As they entered, the reaction was immediate, but quieter than before. Less whispering, more staring. The kind of attention that didn't need words to communicate judgment. Damon thrived in it, as always. "Stay close for the first round," he murmured, guiding her forward. "Then you can drift." Drift. Like she was an accessory he could set aside once he'd made his entrance. Anita didn't respond. She didn't need to. They both knew the pattern. For the first hour, she remained by his side. She listened as he spoke about expansion, acquisitions, influence. She watched the way people leaned in when he talked, how they nodded before he even finished his sentences. Power recognized power, and Damon knew exactly how to wield his. Every so often, he'd reference her. "My wife has an interesting perspective on this," he'd say, but never actually ask for her input. Or worse, "She keeps things unconventional." A soft chuckle would follow, and the conversation would move on. Anita stood still, composed, present but not included. But unlike before, she wasn't shrinking inside. She was observing, cataloging, learning the rhythm of the room the same way she once had in lecture halls and debate chambers. Because power wasn't just about who spoke. It was about who understood. Eventually, Damon released her into the crowd. Not abruptly, never that obvious. He simply stopped anchoring her in conversations, allowing the space between them to widen until she was, once again, alone. Anita moved toward the bar, her steps measured, her expression unreadable. "Whiskey?" the bartender asked politely. She paused, then shook her head. "Water?" He nodded, sliding the glass toward her. She wrapped her fingers around it, grounding herself in the cool surface. "You don't drink now?" The voice came from her left. Familiar. Too familiar. Anita turned slowly, and for a moment the room seemed to still. "James?" she said, her voice quieter than she intended. James Carter looked at her the way people used to, directly, without hesitation, without confusion. His expression held surprise, yes, but not judgment. Recognition. "Nita," he said, using the nickname he hadn't spoken in years. "I almost didn't." He stopped himself. Didn't finish the sentence. But he didn't need to. She understood. "I get that a lot," she replied, her tone controlled. James studied her for a second longer, his gaze sharp but not unkind. He was older now, more grounded, his presence steady in a way that suggested he had built something solid for himself. Back in college, he had been one of the few people who didn't just keep up with Anita. He challenged her. Late-night debates. Competitive internships. A friendship built on mutual respect and unspoken rivalry. He knew who she was, which meant he could see who she wasn't anymore. "What happened?" he asked finally. No judgment. No curiosity dressed as politeness. Just a direct question. Anita let out a small breath, her grip tightening slightly around the glass. "Life," she said. James tilted his head. "No," he replied calmly. "That's not life." She didn't respond. He gestured subtly, not at her face, not at her head, but at the space around her. "This, whatever this is, it's not you." There was no cruelty in his voice. That made it harder to deflect. Anita tried anyway. "People change," she said. "Yeah," James agreed. "They grow. They evolve. They don't disappear." That word landed. Disappear. Anita looked away briefly, her eyes scanning the room before returning to him. "I didn't disappear," she said, quieter now. "I adjusted." James held her gaze. "For who?" he asked. She opened her mouth and closed it again, because the answer was obvious, and saying it out loud would make it real in a way she hadn't fully allowed yet. Across the room, Damon laughed again. The sound cut through the moment like a reminder. Anita's eyes flickered in that direction instinctively. James followed her gaze. He saw Damon. Then he saw the distance between them. Then he looked back at her. Understanding settled in. "Does he know who you are?" James asked. The question caught her off guard. "Not who you were. Who you are." Present tense. Anita hesitated. "I'm his wife," she said, as if that answered it. James didn't react. "That's not what I asked." Silence stretched between them. Because for the first time, she didn't have a clear answer. James stepped a little closer, lowering his voice, not to hide the conversation, but to center it. "You were the most driven person I knew," he said. Not loud. Not reckless. Just certain. Anita swallowed slightly. "You don't just wake up one day and become," he gestured lightly again, searching for the right word, "this version of quiet." Her chest tightened. "It wasn't one day," she admitted. James nodded. "I figured." Another pause. Then more gently, "You don't have to stay here." The words were simple, but they carried weight. Not pressure. Not expectation. Just possibility. Anita let out a slow breath. "You make it sound easy," she said. "I didn't say it was easy," James replied. "I said it was possible." He held her gaze steadily. "And you don't have to figure it out alone." That part lingered, because isolation had become normal, expected, engineered. And now, suddenly, there was an alternative. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The music continued. Conversations flowed. The world around them moved exactly as it had before. But for Anita, something shifted. Not dramatically, not visibly, but internally, something long buried stirred. Not confidence. Not yet. But recognition. Of who she used to be. Of who she might still be. Think about it, James said finally, stepping back slightly. That's all I'm saying. Anita nodded slowly. I will. He gave her a small, knowing look. Good. Then after a brief pause. It's still in there, you know. She frowned slightly. What is? He smiled faintly. You. And just like that, he stepped away, disappearing back into the crowd as quietly as he had arrived. Anita stood still for a long moment after he left. Her reflection caught her eye again in a nearby glass panel. Same appearance. Same controlled image. But her gaze, that was different. Sharpened. Awake. Across the room, Damon was still playing his role, unaware that anything had changed. Unaware that something had just been reintroduced into Anita's world. Not a person. Not even an idea. But a reminder. And reminders, when they take root, have a way of becoming decisions. He just didn't know it yet. The shift didn't announce itself. There was no dramatic confrontation. No breaking point that shattered everything at once. If Damon had been watching closely, really watching, he might have noticed the change. But he wasn't. Because to him, Anita had already been reshaped. And that assumption became his blind spot. It started with silence, but not the kind he was used to. Before, Anita's silence had been heavy. Reactive. Filled with things she swallowed to keep the peace. Now it was different. Intentional. She spoke less, but when she did, her words were measured, precise. She no longer filled space just to ease tension. She let conversations sit. Let Damon reveal more than he intended. You've been quiet lately, he remarked one evening over dinner, barely glancing up from his tablet. Anita cut into her food slowly. I've been listening. Damon smirked faintly. That's an improvement. She didn't respond. But internally she noted the exchange. Every word, every tone, every assumption. Because listening, really listening, was giving her something Damon never intended her to have. Clarity. She began reclaiming herself in fragments. Not outwardly. Not yet. That would come later. For now, everything happened beneath the surface. Late at night, when the house settled into silence and Damon retreated into his office or fell asleep without noticing her absence, Anita moved differently. She found her way back into the study, a room that had once felt shared but had slowly become his domain. Shelves lined with books she used to read. Documents she used to understand. She started there. At first, it felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a version of herself she hadn't visited in years. But the rhythm came back faster than she expected. Case studies, financial reports, legal frameworks. Her mind didn't resist. It responded. She took notes, not on paper but mentally, rebuilding the discipline she once had, sharpening instincts that had dulled under years of suppression. And with every hour she spent reconnecting with that part of herself, something steady returned. Not confidence. Not fully. But competence. And that was enough to begin. James didn't hover. He didn't call constantly or push for updates. That wasn't his role. But when Anita reached out, carefully, deliberately, he answered. Their first real conversation happened over coffee in a quiet part of the city where anonymity was easy to maintain. No stylists. No cameras. No expectations. Just two people sitting across from each other, like they had years ago. You look different, James said, not referring to her appearance. Anita exhaled lightly. I feel different. Good different, he asked. She paused. Aware, she said finally. James nodded. That's where it starts. There was no pity in his tone. No attempt to fix her. Just recognition. Respect. The kind Damon had slowly stripped away. I need to understand something, Anita said, leaning forward slightly. If I leave, I need to do it right. James didn't interrupt. Not emotionally, she clarified. Strategically. That got his attention. A small, almost approving shift in his expression. Then we don't rush it, he said. We build it. We. The word settled differently than Damon's version of partnership ever had. James reached into his bag and slid a card across the table. Her name is Valerie Brooks, he said. Top-tier divorce attorney. Discreet. Calculated. She doesn't lose unless she chooses to. Anita picked up the card, studying it. Why are you helping me? She asked, not suspicious, but needing clarity. James met her gaze evenly. Because I know who you are, he said. And I know this isn't it. Simple. Direct. True. And for the first time, Anita didn't deflect that truth. The meeting with Valerie Brooks happened a week later. Private office. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The kind of space where decisions carried weight. Valerie was sharp, no wasted words, no unnecessary warmth. I'll be direct, she said after reviewing the basics. Damon Cross is not just wealthy, he's protected. His assets are layered, diversified, and likely structured to minimize exposure. Anita nodded. I assumed that. Valerie studied her more closely. Most people in your position don't. I'm not most people, Anita replied. A brief pause. Then, the slightest hint of a smile from Valerie. Good, she said. That makes this easier. They went deeper. Financial structures. Hidden accounts. Investment patterns. Legal vulnerabilities. Anita listened carefully, asking questions at the right moments. Not too many, not too few. By the end of the meeting, Valerie leaned back slightly. He's underestimating you, isn't he? She asked. Anita held her gaze. Yes. Valerie nodded once. Then that's our advantage. Back at home, nothing appeared to change. That was the point. Damon continued as usual. Meetings, events, late nights, controlled appearances. He still dictated her gala looks, still treated her like an extension of his brand. And Anita let him. But now she saw everything differently. Every interaction became data. She noticed how he handled contracts, how he spoke about partnerships, where he cut corners, where he overextended, where his confidence crossed into carelessness. She paid attention to what he assumed she didn't understand, because those assumptions were openings. You don't need to worry about that, Damon said one afternoon when she lingered near his desk while he reviewed documents. Anita tilted her head slightly. About what? He tapped the folder. Business structure. It's complex. She nodded slowly. I'm sure it is. He didn't notice the way her eyes tracked the page. Didn't notice what she absorbed in seconds. Didn't notice that she wasn't asking to understand. She already did. The emotional shift was just as important as the strategic one. Damon's comments didn't land the same way anymore. You're finally staying in your lane, he said one night, almost approvingly. Anita met his gaze calmly. For now, he smirked, interpreting it as agreement. It wasn't. Weeks passed. Then months. And piece by piece, Anita rebuilt herself. Not into who she used to be, but into something sharper. More controlled. More dangerous. Because this version of her understood something the old version didn't need to. How power could be taken, not just earned. The final piece wasn't emotional. It was legal. Paperwork prepared quietly. Evidence documented carefully. Financial pathways mapped with precision. Everything aligned. Everything ready. All that remained was timing. One evening, as they prepared for yet another gala, Damon adjusted his cufflinks, glancing at Anita briefly. This one matters, he said. Don't embarrass me. Anita smoothed the fabric of her dress, her expression composed. I won't, she replied. And for the first time, that wasn't a promise to protect his image. It was a quiet guarantee of his downfall. As they stepped out into the Los Angeles night, the city shimmered like it always did, unaware of the shift about to happen. Damon walked ahead, confident, untouchable in his own mind. Anita followed, calm, prepared, and completely done being controlled, because the version of her he created was about to be the reason he lost everything. The invitation arrived in a black envelope, hand-delivered. No branding, no excess detail, just a name, a date, and a location that didn't need explanation. Damon didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. This is the one, he said, holding the card between his fingers like it was a key to something bigger. Everyone who matters will be there. Anita glanced at it briefly, then looked away. She already knew. Not because of the event, but because of the timing. Everything was in place. The filings had been prepared. The financial groundwork mapped out with precision. Valerie had given the final confirmation just days earlier. Whenever you're ready. And now, she was. The day of the gala unfolded like every other. On the surface, stylists arrived. Garments were laid out. Jewelry was selected with careful intention. Damon moved through it all with the same controlled authority, making decisions without consultation. "This dress," he said, pointing to a structured piece that leaned more toward spectacle than elegance. "It fits the tone." Anita looked at it. Then calmly, "No." The room stilled. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was unfamiliar. Damon turned slowly. "What?" "I said no," she repeated, her tone even. A flicker of something crossed his face, confusion, maybe irritation. But it passed quickly, replaced by a thin smile. "You don't get to improvise tonight, Anita," he said. "Not at this level." She stepped closer, her movements unhurried. "I'm not improvising," she replied. "I'm choosing." The distinction hung in the air. For a moment, it looked like he might push back. But then, he didn't. Because in his mind, there was no real threat. No real consequence. He still believed control was his. "Fine," he said lightly, waving a hand. "Just don't make it distracting." Anita didn't respond. Because distraction was exactly the point. When she stepped out of the car that night, Los Angeles shifted. Not metaphorically. Visibly. Cameras flashed instantly, aggressively, as if something in the atmosphere had snapped into focus. For the first time in years, people didn't hesitate. They reacted. Anita stood at the entrance in a gown that didn't compete for attention. It commanded it. Deep, rich fabric that moved with intention, tailored to her form without excess. Elegant, powerful, undeniable. Her hair, restored, styled in soft, voluminous waves that framed her face with effortless precision. Not overdone. Not performative. Authentic. Her makeup flawless. Balanced. Enhancing rather than masking. She didn't look like a statement. She looked like herself. And that was far more striking. For a moment, even the photographers seemed caught off guard. 65. Then the flashes intensified. "Anita! Over here! Look this way! Mrs. Cross!" She didn't rush. Didn't overpose. She simply turned her head slightly, allowing the cameras to catch her at her own pace. Control. Real control. Damon stepped out beside her. And froze. It was subtle. Most people wouldn't notice. But Anita did. Because she knew him. His stillness wasn't admiration. It was disruption. "What is this?" he muttered under his breath, his smile tight as cameras continued flashing. Anita didn't look at him. "This is me," she said. 3 words. No explanation. No apology. Damon's jaw tightened, but he couldn't react. Not here, not now. Too many eyes. Too many cameras. So he did what he always did. He adapted. Smiled wider. Stepped closer. Placed his hand at her back like everything was exactly as it should be. But the dynamic had already shifted. And everyone could feel it. Inside, the energy spread fast. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Whispers moved quicker than introductions. "That's his wife. She looks, was this planned?" But this time the tone was different. No confusion. No pity. Recognition. Anita didn't linger at the edges anymore. The room adjusted around her. People approached her, intentionally. Not out of obligation, but interest. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you," a woman said, extending her hand. "I've heard a lot about you." Anita shook it, her gaze steady. "I'm sure you have." There was a subtle weight to the words. Because now, she was controlling the narrative. Damon tried to recover. He moved through the room, reasserting himself, reestablishing his rhythm. But something was off. People still engaged him. But their attention, it split. Some glanced past him, toward her. And for a man who built his identity on being the focal point, that shift was everything. Midway through the evening, as the event reached its peak, the organizers took the stage. A brief speech. Acknowledgements. Applause. Then, an unexpected addition. "We'd also like to invite Anita Cross to say a few words," the host announced. A ripple moved through the room. Damon turned sharply. "What is this?" he whispered, low and controlled. Anita met his gaze. "You'll see." And then, she stepped forward. The walk to the stage felt longer than it was. Not because of fear, but because of weight. Every step carried years of silence. Years of control. Years of being reshaped into something smaller. And with each step, she shed it. By the time she reached the microphone, she was steady. The room quieted naturally. Not out of obligation, but anticipation. Anita looked out at the crowd, at the faces that once overlooked her, at the man who thought he had defined her. And then, she spoke. "For a long time," she began, her voice clear, grounded, "I've been introduced as Damon Cross's wife." A pause. Not for effect. For truth. "But that's not who I am." The room stilled. "I am Anita Cross," she continued. "And tonight, I'm choosing to be seen, fully, clearly, and on my own terms." Damon stepped forward slightly, tension visible now. But no one was looking at him. Not anymore. "I've spent years shrinking myself to fit into a version of life that was never mine," she said. "And I take responsibility for allowing that." That part mattered. Because this wasn't just accusation. It was ownership. "But that ends now." The words didn't echo. They landed. "I filed for divorce," she said, calm and direct. Effective immediately. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, movement. But Anita didn't pause. "And I will be reclaiming not only my name, but everything I am legally entitled to." That part hit differently. Because in this room, people understood exactly what that meant. Money, power, control. And the fact that she said it publicly? That wasn't emotion. That was strategy. Damon moved forward, but it was too late. The moment had already shifted beyond him. Cameras turned. Phones lifted. The narrative rewrote itself in real time. The powerful man. Blindsided. The silent wife. Revealed. Anita stepped back from the microphone. No rush. No hesitation. She didn't look at Damon as she passed him. Didn't acknowledge the tension radiating off him. Because she didn't need to. For the first time, he wasn't in control of the room. She was. And as she walked out of that ballroom, the sound behind her wasn't silence. It was movement. The kind that follows a shift in power. The kind that signals something irreversible. Because what Damon built relied on perception. And in one night, Anita didn't just reclaim hers. She destroyed his. The fallout didn't take days. It took hours. By the time Anita's car disappeared into the Los Angeles night, the story was already moving. Through phones, through private group chats, through media contacts who had been in the room and understood exactly what they had just witnessed. By morning, it had a headline. Then another. And another. Billionaire CEO blindsided by wife's public divorce announcement. Anita Cross reclaims identity and stakes claim in billion-dollar split. From silent figure to strategic force, the woman who outplayed Damon Cross. But headlines only captured the surface. What was happening underneath? That was where the real damage lived. Damon tried to contain it. Of course he did. His team moved quickly. PR statements, controlled narratives, quiet calls to media outlets he had influence over. Mutual decision. Private matter. Respectful separation. Clean. Polished. Manageable. But the problem wasn't the divorce. It was how it happened. Public. Precise. Unapologetic. And more importantly, credible. Because Anita hadn't spoken emotionally. She had spoken with clarity, which made people listen differently. Within 48 hours, questions began to surface. Not loud at first. Careful. Strategic. Investors wanted reassurance. Board members wanted context. Because if a man could lose control of something that personal, that publicly, what else had he miscalculated? Damon still showed up to meetings. Still spoke with authority. still wore confidence like armor. But something had shifted. There was a fraction of a second now, right before he spoke, where hesitation lived. And people noticed. Then came the second wave. Legal. Valerie Brooks didn't make noise. She made moves. The filings weren't just standard, they were layered. Detailed. Supported by documentation Damon hadn't realized Anita had access to. Financial structures he thought were insulated. Weren't. Patterns he assumed went unnoticed. Didn't. Every assumption he had made about her lack of awareness became a liability. What exactly did she know? One of his advisors asked in a closed-door meeting. Damon didn't answer immediately, because for the first time, he wasn't sure. Anita, on the other hand, didn't rush into visibility. She didn't book interviews, didn't flood social media, didn't try to control the narrative in the way Damon did. She let it breathe. Let people come to their own conclusions. Because silence, when used correctly, creates curiosity. And curiosity creates attention. When she finally stepped out publicly again, it wasn't at a gala. It was at a panel. Business and Equity in Emerging Tech, an event that would have once been Damon's space. Now, she was invited, not as an extension of him, but as herself. Anita Cross, investor and strategic consultant, the moderator introduced. No mention of Damon. No reference point. Just her name. And her work. She walked onto that stage without hesitation, dressed in a tailored suit that reflected exactly who she was, sharp, intentional, self-defined. The audience didn't whisper this time. They listened. Power isn't always about acquisition, she said midway through the discussion. Sometimes it's about recognition, understanding where you've given it away and deciding to take it back. There was no bitterness in her tone. No need for it. Because this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about position. Behind the scenes, the legal battle intensified. Damon fought. Not emotionally, strategically. But he was reacting now. Not leading. Every move he made was in response to something Anita had already set in motion. And that shift, that was irreversible. Settlements were negotiated. Assets evaluated. Control redistributed. It wasn't clean. It wasn't quick, but it was effective. In the end, Anita didn't just walk away with wealth. She walked away with leverage, a significant share of what Damon had built, and the autonomy to use it however she chose. Months later, the city had adjusted. Because Los Angeles always does. New stories replaced old ones. New headlines took over. But some narratives don't fade. They evolve. Damon was still powerful, still wealthy. But no longer untouchable. There was a fracture in the image now. Subtle, but permanent. Anita didn't disappear. She expanded. Carefully. Intentionally. She invested in companies that aligned with her values. Diverse founders, overlooked markets, ideas that didn't need validation from traditional power structures. She funded mentorship programs for young Black women entering law, tech, and finance. Spaces she understood intimately. Not as charity, as infrastructure, because she knew what access could change. One afternoon, months after everything settled, she sat at an outdoor cafe in West Hollywood. No cameras, no spectacle, just sunlight, conversation, and space. James sat across from her, watching her with a quiet kind of recognition. "You're different," he said. Anita smiled slightly. "I've heard that before." He shook his head. "No, I mean complete." She considered that. Not defensively. Just honestly. "I think I'm aligned," she said. That felt more accurate. James leaned back slightly. "You know, when I saw you that night, I wasn't sure how long it would take." "To do what?" she asked. "To come back." Anita shook her head gently. "I didn't come back," she said. "I moved forward. Because the version of her from before, she wasn't trying to recover it. She had outgrown it." She glanced out at the street, watching people move through the city, each carrying their own stories, their own battles, their own transformations. Los Angeles hadn't changed, but her place in it had, for the first time in a long time. She wasn't standing beside someone else's power. She wasn't being shaped, managed, or minimized. She wasn't performing. She was choosing. Every move, every decision, every version of herself she allowed the world to see. And somewhere, in rooms she no longer needed access to, Damon Cross was still trying to rebuild control over a narrative that no longer belonged to him. But Anita? She wasn't interested in controlling the past. She had something better: ownership of her future. And this time, no one was taking that from her. Finally, we have come to the end of this story. I hope you enjoyed the story. If so, do well to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.